Hi friends, Angelica here. Welcome back to my channel. I am super excited for today's video. It's Christmas in July and we are about to make some Christmas cards. I am using products from Colorado Craft Company's July release. We'll be mixing a few stamp sets together and we're going to be doing a few different techniques, including some quick Copic coloring. Also, we're going to use a stamp and die set in a little bit of a different way. There's a lot to get to, so let's get started. The first stamp set that we are going to be using today is the Big and Bold Pine Swag. This stamp set has the large pine image and then a few holiday sentiments and a small berry stamp. This stamp set is part of the Big and Bold Slimline collection and there is a coordinating die set available. I am stamping the Pine Swag onto cream cardstock using Tailored Expressions Toffee ink. I'm going to be stamping 4 panels and then moving on to some Copic coloring. Now this cardstock is pretty soft paper. It's probably the softest cardstock I have in my collection. So I wasn't really sure how coloring on it would be. I used really soft colors and I used a really light hand. I could tell that the alcohol ink could easily spread out instead of into the paper, and I didn't want any bleeding. So the colors that I picked were R20, R30, and R000. So I'm starting with R20 and I'm mapping out where the darkest areas of the ribbon's going to be. I'm using a pretty light hand because I'm going to be going over this ink with R30, and I don't really know how to color on this paper. I've never colored on this paper before, so I'm kind of figuring out how it holds up with ink. Now this is the lightest red color combination I've ever used. I'm usually coloring something pretty vibrant with red, so I tend to get really bold with my colors. This soft palette was pretty refreshing and the ink turned out to be great on the colored cardstock. Now once I got the R20 down, I did blend it out with the R30. And I still used a pretty light hand with the R30, though I tilted my marker a little bit more. So with the R20, I pretty much just used the very tip of the nib. And the R30, I used the tip and then kind of a little bit the side of the nib. And then with the R000, I was able to really just use the side of my nib and do some pretty long flicks just to get those colors moving towards the middle of the ribbon. I used one green marker for the few leaves that are on the swag, and that's YG61. This is a lovely light green. It doesn't lean too far into like the minty green hues. It's just absolutely lovely, and I usually use this for like 2 or 3 more markers, but again, I wanted these colors to be really muted and kind of fade into the background. And I also didn't color the leaves completely in. I did almost like a scribble because I just wanted the colors to fade into the background. There are a few berries that are also in the swag, so I did color those with the light reds too. I went over them first with R000 and then I mapped out the darkest areas with R20 and then blended that out with the R30. I just thought putting the R000 down first just would help move the other inks pretty quickly since these are such small areas to color. Since I kept the coloring so light, I was able to get all 4 panels done in about 20 minutes. For the sentiment, I'm going to be using a stamp from the new Joy Ornaments. This stamp set is another one from the Big and Bold Slimline collection, and it does have coordinating dies that is available, and we're going to be using that die set later on in the video. So I picked Season's Greetings from the stamp set. I love the fonts that is on this stamp. There's 2 fonts, and the cursive is absolutely gorgeous. I did let the panels dry for a bit before I stamped the sentiment because I wanted to heat emboss the sentiment. I don't know. I probably let them sit for about an hour just to make sure that the toffee ink and the Copic ink were completely dry because I didn't want any of these gold flakes to grab onto the wet ink. So I prepped the panels with an anti-static powder, and then I used Versamark embossing ink to stamp the sentiments with. I poured Brutus Monroe gilded embossing powder over the ink and then flicked off any lingering powder flakes that were on the panel. And actually there was none. I usually have to bring out my paper piercer to kind of push off any lingering flakes that are left on the panel. But it just worked out perfect. So I used my heat tool to melt the embossing powder, and I did one panel first. I liked the way it turned out, so then I went back and I did the last 3 panels. The heat tool did warp the panels a little bit, so I stuck them under my Misty overnight to let them flatten out, and it worked. They were flat the next morning and ready to be put on card bases. Before I attached the panels to card bases, I wanted to stamp a sentiment inside the card. So I picked a sentiment from Quick Cards stamp set and got the sentiment ready in my Misty. Now to make sure that the stamp was straight, I used the L ruler from my Misty Corners. This tool is used quite often in my craft room. It's an absolute lifesaver for sentiments that have a straight edge. I stamped the sentiment with toffee ink in all of the card bases, and then I got the panels ready to put on to the card bases. So I like to use double-sided adhesive. I put the adhesive on all 4 sides and a strip down the middle. I expose the middle adhesive, line up the left corners, and once everything's straight, I push down on the middle and then use my reverse tweezers to take the backing off the rest of the adhesive. And that's going to finish the first 4 cards. The next card is a 5x7 card, and I'm going to be using the Joy Ornaments stamp and die set. I'm going to make 3 stencils out of a sheet of 12x12 paper and using the dies. Now, using dies to make your own stencils is a great way to stretch your supplies, plus save a little bit of money. I'm lining the left upper corner of each stencil to the card front and then positioning the die where I want each ornament to hang on the card front. And the reason why I'm doing this is because I cannot see through the paper, so I don't want to guess where the balls are hanging. If you had vellum, you could do this too. I'm pretty stingy with my good paper and vellum, so I just used this 12x12 paper that I've been hanging on to for a while. I closed up the stencil using a Post-it note, and now I'm going to ink blend aquamarine ink over the paper. I'm using a pretty heavy hand with my inking on the bottom right corner of the ornament, so the light source looked like it's coming from the upper left corner. Once I finished inking, I covered the ornament with a mask that I also die cut. And this way the turquoise ornament will be the front ornament. I'll be doing the same steps with the other 2 ornaments, making sure I line up each stencil to the upper left corner of the card front. I'm using Pink Fresh Studio bubblegum ink for the pink ornament, and I started off with passion fruit ink for the red ornament, but then I switched over to Berrylicious because I wanted a more rich red for the ornament. I did make sure that I closed each stencil before inking, and then I also covered the right side of the card front just to be sure I didn't go over the stencil when I was using the red ink. Now that the stenciling is done, it is time to start stamping. I don't want to use the chain or topper that's part of the stamp, so I'm going to use my detail scissors to trim the chain off, and I'll put that away back with the stamp set for future use. And I'm going to be reusing the Post-it notes to mask off the top of each ornament so I don't stamp the topper. I'm carefully lining up the stamp to the back 2 ornaments first, and I'm using inks that will fade nicely into the blended ink. I just finished blending the ink, so the card front is still wet, which makes it perfect for the stamped ink to blend into the paper, which gives a really pretty effect rather than chancing the cardstock being dry and the stamped ink kind of sits on top. I want it to look a bit more realistic. And I should mention I'm using Nina 110-pound Solar White cardstock. Once the mask comes off, you can really see the scene coming together. I stamped the front ornament with aquamarine ink. This is the same ink I had stenciled with. And I thought the ornament was just a bit too light for the stamped image. So I ended up reattaching the stencil to the ornament, and I'm going to blend a little bit of a darker ink to deepen that color. I used Mermaid Cove ink, which is the next darker color in this Pink Fresh Studio ink family, and it really made a difference. The ornament is now bolder and the stamped image isn't so vibrant. Since I cut the chain off the stamp, I needed something for the ornaments to hang from. So I used my glitter gel pen and tea ruler to make strings. Now this glitter color is really pretty in person. It looks like metallic thread. Once I had the lines drawn, it's time to move on to the sentiment, and I did pick the season's greeting stamp to use again. I brought back out my Misty and L-shaped ruler, and I'm making sure that the sentiment is straight and in the right position. Once I was happy, I stamped the sentiment with Pink Fresh Studio dough ink, and then I moved on to putting the card together. Before I attached the card front to a 5x7 card base, I wanted to back it with colored paper. I picked this really pretty metallic brown paper. Brown is not a typical color I would use for Christmas cards, but this paper was perfect for this card. I trimmed the metallic paper to 4 3/4 to 6 3/4, and then trimmed the card front a little smaller than that. I didn't know if I wanted a white card base or a craft colored card base, so I just made two, and I ended up liking the craft card base the best. I attached the papers together with double-sided adhesive, and then again used double-sided adhesive to add the panel to the card base. My last step for the card was to add bows as toppers for the ornaments. I thought this would be a fun way to add a little bit more texture to the card and to cover up the slightly flat part that's at the top of each ornament from when I used the masks. So I picked a small bow die from Pretty Pink Posh Twine and Bow Set, and I used it to die cut Concord and 9th copper glitter paper. I attached the bows with a tiny amount of glue, making sure I didn't have any glue coming out and smudging the inked ornaments in any way. I got the 3 ribbons on the ornaments, and that finishes the card. I hope I was able to share some new ideas and inspiration for Christmas cards. I'll leave links to the products used down in the description box, as well as a link to my blog where you'll find more details on Colorado Craft Company's Christmas in July release. That's all that I have for today. I want to thank you so much for joining me. If you enjoyed what you saw, please give this video a thumbs up, and if you'd like to see more, be sure to subscribe. I'll be back shortly with another video, so I'll see you then. Bye.